The Henderson family had always been the picture of suburban perfection in Cedar Park, their two-story colonial standing proudly on Maple Ridge Drive like a monument to American prosperity. Sarah Henderson, 42 and recently widowed, had inherited not just the house but the weight of maintaining appearances in a community where patriotism wasn't just expected, it was demanded with an intensity that bordered on surveillance. The inheritance had come with complications that extended far beyond financial arrangements. Her late husband Michael's military pension provided stability, but the house carried secrets in its walls that Sarah was only beginning to discover. Hidden behind the basement paneling, she'd found boxes of documents that painted a different picture of Michael's service than the one he'd shared with her and their 15-year-old daughter Emma. Cedar Park itself had attracted the Henderson family precisely because of its reputation as a military-friendly community. The subdivisions were filled with active duty and retired service members who'd chosen the area for its schools, safety, and shared values. American flags adorned nearly every porch, yellow ribbon magnets declared support for troops on every other vehicle, and community events invariably began with patriotic ceremonies that reinforced residents' collective identity. This environment had initially comforted Sarah during Michael's deployments, providing her with neighbors who understood the unique stresses of military life. The community's support systems had functioned smoothly when her role was clearly defined, devoted military wife maintaining the home front while her husband served overseas. But widowhood had shifted her status in ways she was only beginning to understand, transforming her from protected military dependent into potential threat to community stability. Emma possessed an unsettling ability to read people that made adults uncomfortable. While other teenagers obsessed over social media, she watched faces, cataloged inconsistencies, and asked questions that cut too close to truths people preferred to keep buried. Her teachers called her perceptive, her classmates found her weird. Sarah had learned to trust her daughter's instincts, even when they contradicted her own hopes. The teenager's unusual awareness had developed during Michael's increasingly difficult homecomings from deployment. Emma had been the first to notice her father's struggles with reintegration, his startled responses to unexpected sounds, his tendency to position himself where he could observe all exits in any room. While Sarah had attributed these behaviors to normal adjustment stress, Emma had recognized them as signs of deeper trauma that required careful navigation. Michael had confided in Emma during his final months, sharing concerns about his military service that he'd shielded from Sarah. The father-daughter conversations had occurred during late-night kitchen meetings when Sarah was asleep, creating a bond of shared knowledge that now served as Emma's protection against adults who underestimated her understanding of complex situations. The family's recent upheaval had attracted the attention of their neighbor, Patricia Colton, a woman whose volunteer work with veterans organizations and school board involvement gave her considerable influence in their tight-knit community. Patricia had appeared at their door within days of Michael's funeral, offering casseroles and unsolicited advice about proper grieving protocols. Her husband Frank, a retired colonel, nodded approvingly from their adjacent driveway whenever Patricia extended her helpful presence into the Henderson household. Patricia's involvement in Veterans Affairs provided her with access to information and resources that most civilians couldn't obtain. She served on committees that reviewed benefit applications, participated in programs that supported military families during crises, and maintained relationships with active duty personnel who respected her dedication to their community. This network of connections made her opinions carry weight that extended far beyond normal neighborhood influence. The shift in family dynamics had been subtle but unmistakable. Where once the Hendersons had been simply another military family blending into Cedar Park's landscape of flag-adorned porches and yellow ribbon magnets, Sarah now felt constantly observed, measured against standards she hadn't agreed to meet. The first incident occurred during the Veterans Day ceremony at Cedar Park High School. Sarah stood in the auditorium beside other parents, hands folded rather than placed over her heart during the Pledge of Allegiance. The omission hadn't been intentional. Her mind had wandered to the documents hidden in her basement, the discrepancies between Michael's official commendations and his private journals that spoke of orders refused and consequences accepted. The ceremony itself felt hollow to Sarah, a performance of patriotism that seemed disconnected from the complex realities her husband had faced overseas. The student speakers recited rehearsed tributes to heroism and sacrifice while parents in the audience competed to display the most visible signs of respect. Sarah found herself studying faces instead of focusing on the program, noticing how performative gestures had replaced genuine reflection on what military service actually meant for families like hers. Michael's journals, discovered only weeks after his funeral, had shattered her understanding of his final years of service. His official record spoke of commendations and successful missions, but his private writings revealed a man tormented by orders that violated his moral code. He'd written about villages evacuated based on false intelligence, about resources diverted to contractors who prioritized profit over soldier safety, about superior officers who punished subordinates for reporting war crimes they'd been ordered to commit. Patricia noticed immediately. Her sharp intake of breath cut through the recited words, and Sarah felt the weight of judgment before understanding its source. After the ceremony, Patricia approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Everything all right, dear? You seemed distracted during the pledge." The question carried implications that made Sarah's skin crawl, but she offered the expected response about grief and adjustment. Patricia's expression softened with theatrical sympathy while her eyes remained calculating. Emma had witnessed the exchange from across the auditorium, her teenage radar detecting the undercurrents that adults tried to disguise as concern. Later, walking to their car, she broke the silence with characteristic directness. "Mrs. Colton was watching you the whole time. Even before the pledge thing. She's been watching our house too." Sarah wanted to dismiss her daughter's observation as paranoid imagination, but the memory of Patricia's bedroom window overlooking their backyard made denial impossible. The woman's helpful visits had increased in frequency since the funeral, each one accompanied by subtle questions about Michael's military service and Sarah's plans for maintaining his legacy. The mysterious elements began accumulating like storm clouds. Mail delivery became erratic, with important documents arriving days late or not at all. Their home security system, installed by Michael years earlier, began experiencing glitches, false alarms that brought police to their door, creating incidents that reflected poorly on the widow's ability to manage her household. The security system malfunctions followed a pattern that seemed too convenient to be coincidental. Each false alarm occurred during moments when Sarah was making progress in organizing Michael's papers or connecting with other military families who might understand her situation. The timing suggested surveillance that went beyond neighborly nosiness into something more calculated and invasive. Sarah began documenting these incidents, photographing timestamps and recording details that might later prove useful. Her investigative instincts, dormant during years of military wife compliance, awakened as she recognized the systematic nature of the harassment. Someone was working methodically to isolate her family and undermine her credibility within the community. The electronic interference extended beyond their home security. Their internet service became unreliable during video calls with Michael's former colleagues, cutting out whenever conversations turned to his final deployment. Phone calls to veteran support services resulted in busy signals or transfers to voicemail systems that never returned her messages. The technological sabotage was subtle but effective, preventing Sarah from building the support networks she needed to process her grief and understand her husband's true legacy. Frank Colton's involvement became more apparent during these episodes. His military bearing and authoritative voice invariably impressed the responding officers, who accepted his explanations about grief-induced instability with grateful nods. Sarah found herself painted as an unreliable narrator of her own experiences, her concerns dismissed as symptoms of emotional fragility. The mask slipped during a neighborhood barbecue when Sarah overheard Patricia speaking to another military wife about the importance of maintaining proper respect for fallen heroes. The conversation referenced families who forgot their obligations to community standards, who allowed personal grief to override patriotic duty. Sarah recognized herself in the coded language, understanding that her perceived disrespect had become neighborhood gossip. The concrete evidence arrived in an unmarked envelope slipped under Sarah's door while she attended Emma's parent-teacher conference. Inside were photocopies of Michael's classified military files, documents that should have been impossible for civilians to access. The papers revealed a different story than the one immortalized in local newspaper obituaries and memorial service speeches. Michael had been court-martialed for refusing orders during his final deployment. His discharge had been less than honorable, his pension awarded through a bureaucratic oversight that his commanding officers had chosen not to correct. The documents suggested that someone with significant military connections had been investigating his background, gathering ammunition for purposes that remained unclear. The classified files contained details that made Sarah's blood run cold. Michael had witnessed his commanding officer, Colonel James Patterson, diverting supplies meant for wounded soldiers to black market dealers who sold them to insurgent groups. When Michael reported the theft through proper channels, he'd been threatened with court-martial for insubordination. His refusal to participate in the cover-up had resulted in his transfer to the most dangerous assignments, a form of punishment designed to silence him permanently. The papers included correspondence between Patterson and other officers discussing Michael's reliability issues and the need to contain his disruptive influence on unit morale. Sarah recognized Frank Colton's signature on several documents, establishing a connection between her neighbor's current harassment campaign and her husband's military persecution. The conspiracy against Michael had followed him home, extending beyond his death to target his family. Most disturbing were the psychological evaluation reports that painted Michael as mentally unstable, filed after his attempts to report the corruption. The evaluations had been conducted by military psychiatrists who concluded that his moral objections indicated a break from reality rather than legitimate ethical concerns. These reports had been used to justify his isolation from other soldiers and his eventual discharge under conditions that destroyed his reputation within military circles. The warning came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman who lived 3 houses down, approached Sarah during her morning walk with information that chilled her blood. Patricia Colton had been asking questions about the Henderson family's loyalty, suggesting that Michael's widow was displaying troubling anti-American attitudes that required community intervention. "She mentioned your daughter, too," Mrs. Rodriguez whispered, glancing nervously toward the Colton house. "Said the girl was picking up dangerous ideas, questioning authority in ways that concerned her teachers." Sarah's stomach dropped as she realized Emma had become a target. Her daughter's perceptive nature, once merely uncomfortable for adults, now represented a threat to whatever agenda Patricia was pursuing. The thought of her child being manipulated or punished for her mother's perceived failures ignited a protective fury that burned away Sarah's remaining politeness. The protagonist's judgment became a battlefield as Patricia's campaign intensified. Neighbors who had offered genuine condolences after Michael's death now regarded Sarah with suspicion. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Invitations to community events ceased arriving. The isolation felt deliberate, calculated to make her question her own perceptions and seek reconciliation through compliance. Sarah found herself analyzing every interaction, wondering which neighbors remained genuine allies and which had been influenced by Patricia's narrative. The grocery store checkout conversations that had once provided pleasant social connection now carried undercurrents of judgment. Cashiers who had previously thanked her for her family's service now processed her purchases with professional politeness that felt distinctly cold. The psychological pressure extended to Emma's school environment, where teachers who had once praised her insights now expressed concerns about her negative attitude and disruptive questions. Parent-teacher conferences became exercises in defending her daughter's character against implications that the teenager was absorbing unhealthy perspectives at home. The academic environment that had once nurtured Emma's intellectual curiosity now treated her analytical thinking as a problem requiring correction. Most insidious was the way Patricia's campaign made Sarah doubt her own memories and perceptions. The widow found herself second-guessing conversations, wondering if she'd misunderstood neighborly concern as manipulation. The gaslighting was expertly executed, designed to make her question not just her judgment about current events, but her understanding of her entire marriage and Michael's character. Addressing the suspicions directly proved impossible. When Sarah attempted to confront Patricia about the surveillance and gossip campaign, the woman's response was a masterpiece of gaslighting wrapped in concerned neighbor rhetoric. Patricia expressed bewilderment at Sarah's accusations, citing only her desire to help a grieving family maintain their connection to the community that had supported them. The confrontation took place in Patricia's pristine living room, surrounded by photographs of her volunteer work and commendations for community service. The setting itself served as evidence of Patricia's credibility, while Sarah's accusations seemed increasingly paranoid and ungrateful. Frank's presence during the meeting provided additional authority, his military bearing lending weight to their expressions of hurt bewilderment at Sarah's hostility. The confrontation ended with false reassurance that felt more like a threat. Patricia promised to pray for Sarah's healing and suggested that professional counseling might help her process the complex emotions surrounding her husband's death. The implication that Sarah's mental state was deteriorating became another weapon in Patricia's arsenal, a narrative that explained away any resistance to her escalating control. The life-threatening situation revealed itself on a humid Tuesday evening when Sarah discovered Emma missing from her bedroom. The teenager's phone lay on her desk beside homework that appeared to have been interrupted mid-sentence. No signs of struggle, no indication of voluntary departure, just an absence that transformed the house into a crime scene painted in ordinary suburban colors. The discovery came during Sarah's routine evening check, a habit developed during Michael's deployments when she needed constant reassurance about her daughter's safety. Emma's bedroom showed all the signs of normal teenage occupation: textbooks scattered across her desk, clothes draped over her chair, earbuds tangled on her nightstand. But the absence of the teenager herself created an wrongness that made Sarah's skin crawl. The timing was particularly sinister given the escalating tension with Patricia. Emma had mentioned increased scrutiny from teachers and guidance counselors who seemed unusually interested in her home life and family relationships. The teenager had complained about being called to the office for conversations about her adjustment to her father's death, meetings that seemed designed to gather information rather than provide support. Sarah's immediate instinct was to contact police, but her recent experiences with law enforcement during the security system incidents had taught her to expect skepticism rather than assistance. The responding officers had consistently treated her as an unreliable witness to her own experiences, accepting Frank Colton's authoritative explanations while dismissing her concerns as symptoms of grief-induced paranoia. Patricia's timing was impeccable. She appeared at Sarah's door within minutes of the discovery, her expression radiating the appropriate mixture of concern and authority. Frank accompanied her, his military bearing suggesting he was prepared to take charge of a situation that clearly required masculine intervention. Their rapid response suggested they'd been monitoring the Henderson house, waiting for exactly this type of crisis to provide them with an opportunity to demonstrate their indispensability. "We saw Emma leave about an hour ago," Patricia announced, her voice carrying just enough hesitation to suggest reluctance at sharing difficult information. She seemed upset, possibly under the influence. Frank thought it best to let her walk it off rather than cause a scene. The lie was expertly crafted, designed to shift blame to Sarah's parenting while positioning the Coltons as reluctant witnesses to family dysfunction. Sarah recognized the manipulation immediately, but the possibility that Emma was in danger overrode her anger at being deceived. Time constraints created unbearable pressure. If Emma had been taken, every moment of delay decreased the chances of finding her safely. If she had genuinely run away, Sarah's pursuit would validate Patricia's narrative about family instability. The choice between protecting her daughter's reputation and protecting her daughter's life wasn't really a choice at all. The full extent of betrayal revealed itself when Sarah's frantic search led her to the abandoned construction site on the outskirts of Cedar Park. Emma's voice, muffled but unmistakably terrified, called out from within a partially completed foundation. The teenager had been left in a concrete pit with no ladder, no means of escape, and no explanation of how she'd arrived there. As Sarah lowered herself into the pit using construction rope, Emma's whispered account of the evening's events shattered any remaining illusions about their neighbor's motivations. Patricia had approached Emma after school with information about her father's military service, claiming to have evidence that would restore his reputation and their family's standing in the community. The trap had been carefully planned. Emma was led to believe she was helping her mother by gathering information that would counter the gossip campaign. Instead, she'd been isolated and abandoned, left to serve as leverage in a larger game whose rules Sarah was only beginning to understand. The unexpected element that changed everything was Emma's discovery of why she'd really been taken. Hidden in her jacket pocket was a USB drive containing files that Patricia had intended to plant in the Henderson home during Sarah's anticipated panic-driven absence. The drive held evidence of financial fraud involving veterans' benefit funds, documents that would frame Michael posthumously for crimes that would destroy his family's remaining reputation and justify seizing their home through legal mechanisms. Sarah's transformation from victim to survivor began in that concrete pit, fueled by maternal rage and the clarity that comes with absolute desperation. Her knowledge of Michael's hidden documents, initially a source of confusion and betrayal, now became her weapon. She understood that Patricia's investigation had uncovered the same discrepancies but had chosen to weaponize them rather than seek truth. The escape required using skills Sarah had developed during her marriage to a man who'd taught her to question authority and trust her instincts. Michael's paranoia about government surveillance, once a source of marital tension, had resulted in communication protocols that now proved invaluable. Hidden throughout their house were emergency supplies and contact information for people who operated outside normal channels. Michael's preparation for exactly this type of situation became clear as Sarah accessed his hidden resources. Behind false walls and inside everyday objects, she found encrypted phones, cash reserves, and detailed maps of escape routes through Cedar Park's utility tunnels and drainage systems. His journals included codes for contacting investigative journalists and human rights attorneys who specialized in military corruption cases. The emergency protocols extended to Emma's education as well. Without Sarah's knowledge, Michael had taught his daughter basic surveillance detection and communication security. Emma's seemingly innocent habit of taking photos during family outings had been training in documentation techniques. Her questions about people's motivations and inconsistencies in their stories reflected lessons in psychological manipulation recognition that now served as protection against predators like Patricia Colton. Sarah's transformation accelerated as she realized Michael had been preparing their family for exactly this scenario. His documented evidence against Colonel Patterson and the corruption network included not just military crimes but civilian fraud schemes involving veterans' benefits and community organizations. The scope of the conspiracy dwarfed anything Sarah had imagined, extending throughout Texas military communities and involving officials at multiple levels of government. The unexpected ally emerged from the least likely source. Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly neighbor who'd warned Sarah about Patricia's activities, had been documenting the campaign of harassment with the methodical precision of someone who'd survived authoritarian regimes in her youth. Her files contained photographs, recorded conversations, and witness testimonies that painted a comprehensive picture of systematic abuse. "I've seen this before," Mrs. Rodriguez explained as she helped Sarah and Emma navigate the network of neighbors who'd remained silent but not blind to Patricia's activities. People who use patriotism as a weapon, who decide who deserves to belong. They always overreach, always assume their authority is unlimited. The elderly woman's background provided crucial context for understanding the conspiracy's methods. Having fled political persecution in her native country decades earlier, Mrs. Rodriguez recognized the techniques being used against the Henderson family. Her experience with community informants and neighborhood surveillance had taught her to document everything while appearing harmless and uninvolved. Mrs. Rodriguez's evidence collection had begun months before Sarah realized she was being targeted. Photographs showed Patricia and Frank conducting surveillance from their upstairs windows, timing their observations to coincide with Sarah's daily routines. Audio recordings captured conversations between the Coltons and other neighbors, revealing the systematic spread of rumors designed to isolate and discredit the Henderson family. The network of silent allies extended beyond Mrs. Rodriguez to include other neighbors who'd recognized the harassment campaign but feared becoming targets themselves. These residents had maintained careful neutrality while privately documenting the conspiracy, creating a parallel record of events that contradicted the official narrative Patricia had been constructing. The physical journey from the construction site to safety mirrored Sarah's emotional transformation from defensive widow to protective mother willing to destroy her enemies. The route took them through backyards and alleyways, avoiding main streets where Patricia's allies might intercept them. Each step reinforced Sarah's understanding that her family's survival depended on her willingness to fight using methods her opponents wouldn't expect. Patricia's plan began unraveling when Sarah turned the tables on surveillance. Using equipment Michael had hidden in their basement, she recorded Patricia's conversations with Frank and other conspirators. The recordings revealed a network of military retirees who'd been targeting families they perceived as insufficiently patriotic, using their positions in veterans' organizations to access private information and coordinate harassment campaigns. The confrontation came when Patricia arrived at the Henderson house expecting to find a family destroyed by Emma's disappearance. Instead, she found Sarah waiting with evidence of fraud, kidnapping, and conspiracy. The woman who'd presented herself as a pillar of community virtue crumbled when faced with proof of her crimes, her authoritative facade collapsing into desperate pleading and threats. The consequences for Patricia and her network arrived swiftly once law enforcement agencies became involved. Federal investigators, drawn by evidence of veterans' benefit fraud and civil rights violations, discovered a pattern of abuse that extended beyond Cedar Park into military communities across Texas. Patricia's volunteer work had provided cover for systematic theft and intimidation, crimes that carried sentences measured in decades rather than years. Frank Colton's military record underwent scrutiny that revealed his retirement had been negotiated to avoid court-martial for similar activities during his active service. His authoritative bearing couldn't survive the revelation that his career had ended in disgrace, his pension revoked as authorities uncovered years of financial crimes committed under the guise of supporting veterans. The complete truth behind the deception emerged during trial proceedings that made national news. Patricia's obsession with controlling her community's patriotic expression had masked a profitable scheme involving stolen identities, fraudulent benefit claims, and property seizures disguised as community improvement initiatives. Families who'd lost homes to tax liens and foreclosure discovered their legal troubles had been artificially created by people they trusted. The investigation revealed a network that spanned multiple states, with Patricia serving as a regional coordinator for a conspiracy that had been operating for over a decade. The group targeted military families during vulnerable periods, deaths, divorces, medical crises, using their positions in veterans' organizations to identify potential victims. Their method involved creating artificial financial crises through administrative manipulation, then offering solutions that resulted in property transfers and benefit theft. Colonel Patterson's role connected the military corruption to the civilian fraud scheme. After his forced retirement from active duty, he'd maintained access to military databases through veterans advocacy organizations. His psychological warfare experience had been adapted for civilian targets, using techniques developed to break enemy combatants against American families who threatened to expose their crimes. The trial testimony revealed how Sarah's family had been selected for destruction months before Michael's death. His growing evidence collection against the military corruption network had marked him for elimination, but his unexpected death from cancer had required adapting their strategy to target his widow and daughter instead. Patricia's seemingly helpful presence immediately after his funeral had been reconnaissance for a systematic campaign designed to seize the Henderson family's assets while destroying their credibility. Expert witnesses explained how the conspiracy had weaponized community patriotism to silence opposition. By framing resistance as disloyalty, they created an environment where victims were afraid to seek help and potential allies were afraid to offer support. The manipulation of patriotic symbols and military respect had turned entire communities into enforcement mechanisms for criminal enterprises. The mystery elements from earlier in the story gained sinister significance. The mail delivery problems had been arranged to intercept legal documents that might have exposed the fraud. The security system glitches had been designed to create police reports that would support narratives about family dysfunction. Even Emma's teacher conferences had been manipulated to generate concerns about the teenager's mental state and home environment. Innocent characters found closure as the investigation revealed the scope of manipulation they'd endured. Neighbors who participated in Sarah's ostracization discovered they'd been fed carefully crafted lies designed to isolate families who might resist the conspiracy. The community's healing process required acknowledging how easily they'd been turned against their own members. The new beginning for the Henderson family involved choices that honored both Michael's true legacy and their own survival. Sarah's decision to make his classified files public exposed the military's failure to support soldiers who'd refused immoral orders, leading to policy changes that protected future whistleblowers. Her testimony helped prosecutors understand how veterans' benefit systems could be exploited by those who claimed to serve them. The final scene took place 6 months later during another Veterans Day ceremony at Cedar Park High School. This time, Sarah stood with her hand over her heart during the Pledge of Allegiance, not from compliance with community pressure but from genuine respect for the values her husband had died defending. Emma stood beside her, no longer the weird kid who asked uncomfortable questions but a young woman whose perceptiveness was recognized as a valuable contribution to their community's integrity. The ceremony had been transformed by the revelations of the previous months. Instead of performative displays of patriotism, the program focused on honest discussions about the complexities of military service and the responsibilities of civilians to support veterans through difficult truths rather than comfortable lies. Sarah had been invited to speak about her husband's real legacy, not as a perfect hero, but as a flawed man who'd chosen conscience over career when faced with impossible choices. The auditorium that had once felt hostile now welcomed families who discovered they shared similar struggles with military bureaucracy and community pressure. Sarah's example had given other military spouses permission to discuss their own experiences with moral injury, financial manipulation, and the isolation that came from questioning popular narratives about military service and civilian support. Emma's role in exposing the conspiracy had earned her recognition from organizations that combated fraud against military families. Her testimony about how predators used patriotic manipulation to silence children had led to educational programs that taught young people to recognize and report such abuse. The skills her father had taught her in secret had become tools for protecting other families from similar victimization. The empty Colton house served as a memorial to the dangers of unchecked authority and community complacency. The property had been seized as part of restitution efforts, its value distributed among the families Patricia's network had defrauded. New neighbors who moved into the house were briefed on its history and their responsibility to maintain vigilance against similar schemes. Sarah's transformation from isolated widow to community advocate had inspired changes throughout Cedar Park's veteran support systems. Organizations that had been infiltrated by the conspiracy were restructured with oversight mechanisms that prevented future abuse. The reflexive respect for military authority that had enabled the fraud was replaced by informed scrutiny that honored genuine service while rejecting corruption disguised as patriotism. The lasting impact of their ordeal had transformed Cedar Park from a place where conformity was enforced through intimidation into a community that celebrated the courage required to question authority when it served corruption rather than justice. Sarah's refusal to salute the flag had never been about disrespect for her country. It had been about refusing to honor those who perverted patriotism into a tool for personal gain. Patricia Colton's final victim statement, delivered from federal prison, attempted to paint herself as a patriot whose methods had been extreme but whose motives were pure. The court's rejection of this narrative, supported by testimony from dozens of families she destroyed, established legal precedent for prosecuting those who weaponized nationalism to commit fraud and harassment. The empty house next door served as a daily reminder that evil could flourish behind facades of respectability, but also that communities possessed the power to recognize and reject such corruption when citizens found the courage to trust their instincts over their fears. Sarah's example had shown her neighbors that true patriotism sometimes required the difficult choice to stand alone against popular opinion until truth could emerge from shadow. In the end, they'd called her a traitor for refusing to salute the flag, but her true motives had stunned everyone not with their disloyalty, but with their profound faith in American values that transcended symbolic gestures to demand justice, courage, and the protection of those who couldn't protect themselves. The broader implications of the case extended far beyond Cedar Park's boundaries. Congressional hearings examined how military communities have become vulnerable to exploitation by those who claim to serve them. Veterans Affairs departments implemented new oversight mechanisms designed to prevent future abuse of benefit systems and support networks. Sarah's testimony before these panels became a catalyst for national conversations about the difference between genuine patriotism and performative nationalism. Her experience demonstrated how easily community pressure could be weaponized against families who dared to question authority or seek accountability from those in positions of trust. The Henderson family's ordeal had revealed systematic weaknesses in civilian oversight of military affairs that enabled corruption to flourish unchecked. Sarah's courage in pursuing truth despite community ostracism provided a model for other families facing similar persecution, showing that resistance was possible even when it seemed hopeless. The legal precedents established by Patricia's prosecution created new tools for prosecuting those who exploit military families and veteran communities. Federal legislation bearing Michael's name established protections for military personnel who report corruption and their families who continue seeking justice after their deaths. Emma's role in the investigation had inspired educational programs that taught children and teenagers to recognize manipulation techniques used by predators who exploit community trust. Her example showed that young people's questions and observations, often dismissed as naive or disruptive, could provide crucial insights into adult corruption that mature community members were too invested to acknowledge. The transformation of Cedar Park from a community ruled by fear into one governed by informed vigilance became a model for other military towns struggling with similar challenges. Sarah's leadership in rebuilding their neighborhood's social structures emphasized accountability over hierarchy, creating systems that honored genuine service while rejecting the corruption that had masqueraded as patriotic duty.